A majestic horse breaks all the rules during a major rodeo, running straight toward the stands. The reason for its behavior will reveal a secret no one could have imagined. The sun had barely risen when William Thompson was already on his feet, gazing at the horizon through the window of his home at Springfield Ranch. The orange sky, typical of Dallas, seemed even more vibrant on that special morning, the eve of the largest rodeo in Latin America. His tired but attentive eyes scanned the landscape until they settled on the main stable, where his greatest pride rested. Thunder, the stallion that had become the sensation of recent events. William adjusted his time-worn hat and walked toward the stable, his steps crunching the grass still damp with dew. The familiar scent of animals and fresh straw filled his nostrils as he opened the heavy wooden door. All the horses stirred at his presence, but his attention was focused on just one. Thunder was different that morning. The imposing animal, with its glossy black coat, which usually greeted him with a friendly neigh, seemed restless in its stall. Its eyes, always so expressive, seemed to carry a message William couldn't decipher. The handler approached cautiously, extending his hand to stroke the animal's neck. "What's wrong, buddy? Nervous about today's performance?" William murmured, trying to calm the horse. But Thunder remained agitated, pawing at the packed dirt floor with unusual frequency. In the main house of the ranch, Elizabeth, William's wife, was preparing breakfast while watching her husband through the kitchen window. After 30 years together, she knew that worried expression on his face all too well. William has always been sensitive to his animals, she thought, especially Thunder. The sound of an approaching car caught everyone's attention. It was Michael, the veterinarian who had been tending to the ranch's animals for years. He had arrived for the final checkup before transporting the horses to the main arena of the rodeo. "Good morning, William. How's our champion doing?" Michael asked, already heading toward the stable with his equipment bag. "There's something off with him today, Michael." "I've never seen Thunder this restless," replied William, scratching the back of his neck in a sign of concern. The veterinarian examined Thunder thoroughly. Normal temperature, regular heartbeat, no signs of physical discomfort. "Clinically, everything is perfect with him, William. Maybe it's just the energy of the special day. You know how sensitive these animals can be." But there was something more. William could feel it. In 5 years of working with Thunder, ever since he bought him from a trader at a horse fair, he had never seen him behave like this. The animal, who had always been a symbol of strength and elegance, now seemed to carry an invisible weight. The morning passed quickly with the final preparations. The transport truck arrived promptly at 9, and the team began loading the animals. All of them entered without resistance, except for Thunder. The horse, usually so disciplined, refused to go up the ramp. "Come on, boy, you've done this hundreds of times." William tried to coax him with his calmest voice, but the animal remained unmoved. It took 40 minutes and a lot of patience before Thunder finally agreed to enter the trailer. During the trip to the rodeo arena, William stayed beside the truck in his pickup, the radio softly playing country songs he barely heard. His mind was focused on Thunder and the unusual behavior from that morning. Years of experience with horses had taught him that animals, especially the smart ones like Thunder, sometimes sensed things that humans couldn't perceive. The rodeo arena was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Flags fluttered. In the wind, country music echoed through the speakers, and the smell of traditional food hung in the air. Under other circumstances, William would have been savoring every moment of the environment he loved so much. But today, his concern for Thunder occupied all his thoughts. As he supervised the unloading of the animals, William didn't notice he was being watched. In the main grandstand, still partially empty at that hour of the morning, 2 figures were closely following his movements. An elderly woman with white hair and a serene expression, and her granddaughter, a young woman who seemed intrigued by her grandmother's interest in that man and his black horse. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from, and let's continue, Mrs. Margaret adjusted herself in the bleacher seat, her eyes never leaving the figure of the majestic black horse that had just been unloaded. Beside her, Emily watched her grandmother with growing curiosity. It was the first time in 15 years that Margaret had shown any interest in attending the Dallas rodeo, and her behavior that morning was, to say the least, intriguing. "Grandma, are you okay?" asked Emily, noticing how her grandmother's hands trembled slightly as she held the carved wooden cane that always accompanied her. "I'm fine, dear," replied Margaret, but her voice carried an emotion Emily rarely heard, just some old memories resurfacing. The gentle morning breeze played with Margaret's white hair as she allowed herself to dive into long-buried memories. Her thoughts took her back to 1975, when Starlight Ranch, her property, was one of the most respected in the region. Back then, her horses were known across the country for their exceptional lineage. Emily noticed that her grandmother was lost in thought and decided to wait. She knew few details about Margaret's past as a horse breeder. It was a topic that rarely came up in family conversations, as if it were an old wound no one dared to touch. In the arena, preparations for the event continued. Handlers moved back and forth, checking equipment and making final adjustments. The black horse that had so captured Margaret's attention was now being prepared for a light training session before the main performance. "He reminds me so much of Storm," murmured Margaret, more to herself than to Emily. "Storm?" Emily asked, seizing the rare opening her grandmother had given to talk about the past. Margaret sighed deeply before continuing. "Storm was the main stallion on our ranch, an extraordinary animal with a unique energy. He had a white mark on his chest just like that black horse down there." Emily looked more closely at the animal in the arena. Indeed, a white star-shaped mark adorned its robust chest, elegantly, contrasting with its dark coat. "The last foal of Storm was born just a few days before we lost the ranch," continued Margaret, her voice now softer. "He was special, Emily. He had the same expressive eyes as his father, the same proud stance. I called him Lightning." Emily held her grandmother's hand, feeling it tremble even more as she shared these memories. It was the first time she had heard details about the final days of Starlight Ranch. In the arena, the black horse began its training, moving with a grace that drew everyone's attention. The way it galloped, the way it raised its head. Every movement seemed to mesmerize Margaret. "When Richard Johnson showed up at the ranch," she continued, "he said he wanted to form a partnership. He talked about expansion, modernization, big projects, but I knew the value of what we had built. Our breeding was based on respect and love for the animals, not numbers on a spreadsheet." Emily listened intently, starting to piece together a story that had always been a mystery to her. Richard Johnson was a name she had heard mentioned in family conversations, always with a tone of disdain. "When I refused his proposal, he completely changed," Margaret went on, her eyes still fixed on the black horse, which was now completing a perfect lap around the arena. "Suddenly, documents started appearing, debts I had never incurred. Before we could fully understand what was happening, the ranch was no longer ours." The sound of the loudspeaker announcing the preparations for the afternoon performances momentarily interrupted Margaret's story. Emily noticed how her grandmother straightened up in her chair, her eyes taking on a different gleam. "I never found out where they took the animals," Margaret continued after a moment, "especially little Lightning. He was so young, only a few weeks old when—" Her voice faltered and Emily squeezed her hand in solidarity. In the arena, the black horse had stopped its training and, curiously, seemed to be looking toward the stands where they were seated. "Grandma, do you think—" Emily began to ask, but was interrupted by a sudden movement from the animal in the arena. The black horse had broken free from its handler's control and now fixed its gaze directly on them, its ears pointed forward in a sign of interest. The moment that followed seemed to happen in slow motion. The black horse, known to everyone, as thunder, began to move determinedly toward the stands. The handlers ran after it, trying to catch up, while shouts of surprise echoed through the arena. William, who was watching everything from the preparation area, felt his heart race as he saw his most valuable horse behaving so unpredictably. "Thunder, stop!" William shouted, his voice lost in the commotion that was beginning to build. But the animal seemed deaf to the calls, its eyes fixed on a single point in the stands. Emily instinctively stood up to protect her grandmother, but Margaret remained seated, calm, as if she had been waiting for that moment for years. Her eyes met the horse's, and something inexplicable happened. The animal, which moments before had seemed uncontrollable, slowed its pace, approaching with a gentleness that contradicted all the previous chaos. "It's him, Emily," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "My little lightning." The horse stopped just a few feet away from them, completely ignoring the surrounding chaos. People in the nearby stands moved away in fear, but Margaret extended her trembling hand toward the animal. Thunder, to everyone's astonishment, gently approached, lowering its head until it reached the old woman's hand. William, who had finally managed to get there, stood frozen at the scene. In 5 years, he had never seen Thunder show such a connection with anyone. The animal had always been docile but maintained a natural distance from strangers. Yet there he was, allowing an unknown woman to stroke him as if they were old friends. "Ma'am," called William, approaching cautiously. "Do you know this horse?" Margaret did not respond immediately. Her hands moved along the animal's neck with familiarity until they reached the white mark on its chest. "This mark," she finally said, her voice choked with emotion, "is identical to that of his father, Storm. It was a unique trait of our lineage at Starlight Ranch." Emily watched the scene, her hands covering her mouth in astonishment. The stories her grandmother had just told, which had seemed so distant, were materializing right before her eyes. The black horse, which minutes earlier had been training in the arena, now gently rested its head on Margaret's lap, as if it had found a lost piece of its past. "But how is this possible?" William questioned, his mind trying to process what was happening. "I bought Thunder 5 years ago at a horse fair in Ribeirão Preto." 5 years, Margaret murmured, doing the math in her head. "That was exactly when we lost everything. When Richard Johnson—" Her voice faltered again, but this time it wasn't just from emotion. A familiar figure had appeared at the entrance of the arena, drawn by the commotion. Richard Johnson, now a respected businessman in the rodeo circuit, watched the scene with an expression that mixed surprise and concern. "Can someone explain to me what's going on here?" Richard asked, his authoritative voice cutting through the air like a razor. But before anyone could respond, Thunder let out a loud neigh, a sound that seemed filled with recognition and defiance. William, sensing the tension that had settled, tried to regain control of the situation. "Gentlemen, let's resolve this calmly. We have an important presentation in a few hours and—" "There will be no presentation," interrupted Margaret, her voice regaining a strength that Emily hadn't heard in years. "Not until we uncover the truth about Thunder, about lightning." The crowd that had gathered around began to murmur, intrigued by the unfolding events. Richard Johnson adjusted his expensive tie, visibly uncomfortable with the attention the situation was attracting. "Mrs. Margaret," he said, trying to maintain a conciliatory tone, "you're confusing things. This is just a horse that looks like—" "No," Margaret cut him off, her hand still stroking Thunder's neck. "This is the last son of Storm, the colt you took along with all the other animals when you falsified the documents for my ranch." Margaret's words fell like bombs in the already tense atmosphere. Emily, who had been silently observing everything, felt a growing determination in her chest. Years of doubts about her family's past were beginning to make sense, and she wouldn't let this opportunity to uncover the truth slip away. The silence that followed Margaret's words was deafening. Richard Johnson maintained his imposing posture, but a keen observer might notice the slight tremor in his hands and the sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Emily took advantage of this moment to position herself beside her grandmother, while William Thompson remained between them, his eyes alternating between Margaret and Richard, trying to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. "These are very serious accusations, Mrs. Margaret," said Richard, regaining his composure. "You have no proof of what you're saying. Besides, it's been so long. Long enough for you to build your empire on what you stole from my family," Margaret shot back, her voice carrying an authority that made several onlookers hold their breath. Thunder, still by her side, remained extraordinarily calm, his attentive eyes fixed on Richard. William stepped forward, his features marked by concern and confusion. "Mr. Johnson, you personally sold me this horse at the fair in Ribeirão Preto. You said he came from a breeder in Mato Grosso." Emily, who had been silently observing, saw an opportunity. "Grandpa, Do you still have the purchase documents? Yes, I do. I keep everything in my office, replied William, beginning to grasp the gravity of the situation. Including Thunder's certificate of origin. Richard shifted uneasily, his face turning red. This is ridiculous. I won't stand here listening to these old stories. I have business to attend to. But before he could walk away, a strong voice echoed through the arena. It was Michael, the veterinarian, approaching with a folder of documents in his hands. Perhaps you'd like to explain some inconsistencies I found in Thunder's paperwork, Mr. Johnson. The veterinarian had spent the past few weeks puzzled by small details that didn't align with the animal's medical history. The age recorded in the documents doesn't match the horse's physical characteristics. Additionally, the declared lineage contradicts genetic markers I identified in recent tests. The crowd, already sizable, grew by the minute. Rodeo staff, other breeders and spectators formed a circle around the group, captivated by the unfolding drama. Among them, some older faces began to recognize Margaret, remembering the respected breeder she had once been. "I remember you," said a voice from the crowd. It was Joseph, an old handler who now worked at the rodeo arena. Starlight Ranch had the best horses in the region. That stallion, Storm, was a legend. Margaret smiled gratefully as more voices joined in, sharing memories of the old ranch and its exceptional horses. Richard Johnson seemed to shrink with each new testimony that emerged. Emily, realizing the moment was crucial, discreetly pulled out her phone and began photographing the documents Michael had brought. As a newly graduated lawyer, she knew the value those pieces of evidence could hold. "William," Margaret called, her voice softer now, "you are an honest man, I can see that. You were deceived just as much as I was. But this horse, whom you know as Thunder, is actually Lightning, the last gift my dear Storm left me." The breeder ran his hand over his face, trying to process it all. 5 years of work, performances, and victories with Thunder flashed through his mind, but now with a new perspective. All the animal's unique behaviors, his distinct personality began to make sense. "The original documents from Starlight Ranch," Margaret continued, "must still exist somewhere. Birth records, lineage certificates." "And they do," Emily interrupted, her voice filled with determination. "Grandma, do you remember that old box in the attic? The one you never let me open? I bet there's a lot of important stuff in there." Richard Johnson, who had remained silent for the past few minutes, tried once more to turn the situation around. "This is a ridiculous conspiracy. You can't prove anything. And even if you could, years have passed. Any rights you think you have are long expired." But his words rang hollow in the face of the evident connection between Margaret and the horse, who stood by her side like a loyal guardian. The white mark on his chest, identical to Storm's, gleamed under the morning sun like a silent testament to his true origin. In the old Viana house, Emily climbed the attic stairs with determination, followed by William and Michael, who had agreed to postpone Thunder's presentation at the rodeo. The horse remained at the rodeo arena, under the care of trusted handlers and the constant watch of Joseph, while Margaret rested in the living room, exhausted after the morning's emotions. The attic was bathed in a cozy half-light, rays of sunlight filtering through the slats of dusty blinds. Emily headed straight to a specific corner, where a carved wooden chest rested beneath an old quilt. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed the cover, revealing the beauty of the piece her grandmother had so carefully protected over the years. "My grandmother always said this chest held more than just memories," Emily commented, running. Her hand over the lid decorated with an elaborate carving of horses in motion. "Now I understand why she never allowed anyone to open it." The latch of the chest gave way with a metallic click, releasing a faint scent of old paper and lavender. Emily began carefully removing the items: yellowed photographs, newspaper clippings, notebooks, and finally a worn but still elegant brown leather folder embossed with the golden logo of Starlight Ranch. "This is incredible," murmured Michael, adjusting his glasses as he examined the documents Emily was pulling from the folder. "These are complete genealogical records, property certificates, all with official signatures and stamps." William picked up one of the photographs, where a majestic black horse with a white chest mark stood beside a younger Margaret. "This must be Storm," he said, admiring the striking resemblance to Thunder. "Look at this," Emily called, holding up a particular document. It's Lightning's birth certificate with all the information about his lineage. The date, it matches exactly the period Grandma mentioned. As they delved deeper into the contents of the chest, a story of love for horses and dedication to breeding began to unfold through the meticulously kept records by Margaret. There were detailed notes about each animal, their characteristics, temperaments, and achievements. "Your grandmother wasn't just a breeder," Michael commented, flipping through one of the notebooks. "She was a true scientist. These notes on genetics and equine behavior are decades ahead of their time." Among the documents, Emily found something that made her heart race: a yellowed envelope containing correspondence between Richard Johnson and several individuals involved in the scheme that led to the loss of the ranch. The letters revealed a meticulous plan to forge debts and pressure Margaret into selling the property. "This is more than enough evidence," Emily said, her legal training sharpening her sense of justice. "Richard Johnson not only forged documents, but deliberately conspired to take my grandmother's ranch." William, who had until then maintained a certain reserve about the whole situation, felt his last doubt dissipate. The evidence was irrefutable, and now he fully understood the peculiar behavior of Thunder, or rather Lightning, that morning. "There's one more thing here," said Michael, pulling a thin envelope from the bottom of the trunk. Inside, he found a series of photographic negatives and a small piece of paper with a note, "Security camera, RS office last day." Emily picked up the paper carefully, her mind already working through the implications of the discovery. Grandma thought of everything. She knew we'd need this evidence someday. A noise downstairs caught the group's attention. It was Margaret, who had climbed to the first step of the attic staircase, leaning on her cane. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of hope and apprehension. Emily quickly went down to help her grandmother, guiding her to an old armchair in the corner of the attic. "We found everything, Grandma. Absolutely everything. You kept every piece of evidence, every document we needed." Margaret smiled, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I knew the truth would come out one day. I couldn't let our family's history, the legacy of Storm, be lost." "And it wasn't lost," William assured her, stepping forward respectfully. "Your grandson Lightning grew up to be a champion, even far from you. The blood of your upbringing, the nobility you cultivated for so many years, lives on in every move he makes." While they were organizing the documents to take them back to the rodeo arena, no one noticed a dark car parked across the street, nor the nervous figure of Richard Johnson watching the activity in the house through the tinted windows. Richard Johnson gripped the steering wheel of his imported car so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Through the dark windows, he watched the group leaving the Viana house carrying boxes and folders. His empire, built over 2 decades of manipulations and shady deals, was threatening to collapse because of a chest of memories and a stubborn horse. Grabbing his phone, he quickly dialed his lawyer. "I need you to come to the rodeo arena immediately," he ordered, his voice tense, "and bring all the documents from the old Starlight Ranch, all of them." At the rodeo arena, the news about the drama involving Thunder, now known to many as Lightning, had spread quickly. Groups of people gathered near the stalls, trying to catch a glimpse of the horse that had recognized its true owner after so many years. Joseph, the former handler, stayed close to the animal. While waiting for William and the others to return, he shared stories about the days of Starlight Ranch with the curious onlookers who approached. "That ranch was unlike anything I've ever seen," he said, stroking Lightning's neck. "Mrs. Margaret treated every animal as if they were unique. She knew each one's personality, respected their pace, their traits." A young handler, enchanted by the stories, asked, "And how did she lose everything?" Joseph sighed deeply. "Some people, when they see something special, instead of learning from it, prefer to take it for themselves. That's what Richard Johnson did." At that moment, Richard himself entered the stable, accompanied by 2 men in suits carrying executive folders. His usually controlled face showed barely contained irritation. "Step away from the horse," he ordered. "As a precaution, I will request that Thunder be isolated until this entire situation is properly clarified." "His name is Lightning," a firm voice sounded from the entrance of the stable. It was Emily returning with the documents found in the attic. Behind her were William, Michael, and Margaret, the latter leaning on her cane, but with a gaze more alive than ever. Richard forced a conciliatory smile. "Mrs. Margaret, we can resolve this civilly. I have here all the legal documents that prove ownership of the animal." "Forged documents," interjected Michael, the veterinarian, stepping forward with his own files. "I have here analyses that prove inconsistencies in the dates and the declared lineage." Richard's lawyer cleared his throat, trying to take control of the situation. Any allegations of fraud would need to be proven in court, and after so much time. "Like these," interrupted Emily, spreading the letters found in the trunk on a nearby table. "Correspondence documenting the entire scheme to defraud the ranch's debts, or perhaps the negatives of the photos taken in Mr. Johnson's office on the day he forced my grandmother to sign the property transfer." The color drained from Richard's face. He remembered that day, the photos he didn't know existed. His lawyer picked up some of the documents, flipping through them nervously. "This means nothing," Richard tried to argue, but his voice betrayed his insecurity. "Besides, the horse is now the legal property of Mr. William Thompson." William, who had been silently observing everything, stepped forward. "A property obtained through fraud does not create legitimate ownership, Mr. Johnson. You sold me something that wasn't yours." The crowd that had gathered around murmured in approval. Several long-time breeders from the region who knew the reputation of Starlight Ranch began to voice their support for Margaret. Lightning, as if sensing the tension in the air, neighed loudly and moved toward Margaret, completely ignoring the attempts of Richard's men to restrain him. The animal stopped beside its former owner, creating a scene that moved everyone present. The union between past and present, between justice and truth. The atmosphere at the rodeo arena buzzed with a unique energy. What had started as an ordinary day of rodeo had turned into a historic moment for the community. People of all ages gathered around the stable, sharing stories about the legendary Starlight Ranch and its owner, Margaret Viana. Emily, realizing the moment was crucial, began methodically organizing the evidence on a large makeshift table. Each document, each photo, each letter told a part of the story of how Richard Johnson had systematically planned and executed the takeover of her grandmother's ranch. "Look at this," she said, holding up a specific set of documents. "Here are the original records of Thunder's lineage, including Lightning's birth. And here," she continued, placing other papers beside them, "are the forged documents that Mr. Johnson used to register the same horse as Thunder, supposedly from a breeder in Mato Grosso." Michael, the veterinarian, approached with his own records. "The tests I conducted show genetic markers consistent with the original lineage of Starlight Ranch. It's impossible for this horse to have come from another breeder." Richard Johnson, cornered by the evidence, tried to maintain his authoritative demeanor, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. His lawyer, after quickly reviewing the documents presented by Emily, whispered something in his ear, making him grow even paler. Margaret, seated in a chair near Lightning, watched everything with a serenity that contrasted with the commotion around her. The horse remained by her side like a silent guardian, occasionally lowering its head to receive her caresses. "Mrs. Margaret," Joseph called, approaching respectfully. "Do you remember that last night at the ranch? I was there. I saw when they took the animals." Silence fell over the crowd as the elderly woman adjusted herself in her chair, preparing to speak. "How could I forget, Joseph? It was the hardest night of my life. Richard showed up with several men saying he had a court order to seize the animals as collateral for debts I had never incurred. But you did something that night," Joseph continued, a small smile forming on his wrinkled face. "I saw you with a camera, recording everything." Richard Johnson shifted uncomfortably as Emily pulled an envelope with photographic negatives from her folder. "My grandmother was always sharper than people gave her credit for," she said, holding the negatives up to the light. "These photos show the exact moment when Mr. Johnson and his accomplices forced the transfer of the animals, including clear images of the forged documents being used." A murmur swept through the crowd. William Thompson, who had kept his distance until then, stepped closer to Richard. "How you didn't just sell me a stolen horse," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You tried to erase a family's history, to destroy a legacy built with love and dedication. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Lightning, as if understanding every word spoken, rose to his full height. His elegant stature, the white mark on his chest gleaming under the sunlight streaming through the cracks of the stable, created an image impossible to ignore. "Look at him," Margaret said, her voice choked with emotion. "Even after all these years away from home, away from his roots, the nobility of the Starlight Ranch lineage remains in every move he makes." A group of seasoned breeders from the region, who knew well the reputation of Margaret's work, began to speak up. They shared stories of how the horses from Starlight Ranch had positively influenced the entire region, how Margaret's dedication to preserving the purest bloodlines had raised the standard of horse breeding across the country. "What do you plan to do now?" someone from the crowd asked. Emily stepped forward, the documents neatly arranged in her hands. "We will reclaim not only Lightning, but also the truth. Every document here tells a story of injustice, but also of resilience and love. A story that needs to be set right." Richard Johnson, watching his empire of lies crumble, made one last desperate attempt. "You can't prove there was bad faith in the acquisition of the ranch. The documents may have irregularities, but—" "The documents," Emily interrupted, "are only part of the story. The true testimony is here, alive, before all of us." She pointed to Lightning, who maintained his majestic stance beside Margaret. The afternoon was progressing at the rodeo arena, but no one seemed willing to leave this historic moment. The main rodeo event had been postponed, and spectators arriving for the show were drawn to the drama unfolding in the stables. William, after a few moments of deep reflection, made a decision that surprised everyone. Approaching Margaret with his hat in hand, he declared, "Ma'am, regardless of what happens in the courts, I want you to know that Lightning is yours. He always has been. I was merely a temporary guardian, even without realizing it." The breeder's words stirred emotion among those present. Richard Johnson, seeing his last hope of control over the situation fading, tried a new approach. "We can settle this amicably," he proposed, his once authoritative tone now almost pleading. "I can offer generous financial compensation, and everyone wins." "You still don't understand," replied Margaret, rising with the help of her cane. "This was never about money. It was about love, tradition, respect for the animals, and the work of a lifetime." Emily, who was still organizing the evidence, added, "And about justice, Mr. Johnson. You didn't just steal a ranch and its animals. You stole dreams, memories, a legacy that should have continued." At that moment, Michael, who had briefly stepped away, returned with a surprising discovery. "Everyone, I've just received the full results of Lightning's DNA tests. There's no doubt. He is the son of Storm and belongs to the exclusive lineage of Starlight Ranch." The news caused another wave of excitement. Richard's lawyer, realizing the situation was untenable, pulled his client aside, speaking in urgent tones. After a few minutes, Richard returned to the group, visibly defeated. "All right," he said, running a hand over his tired face. "I'll confess everything. I forged the documents, created fake debts, manipulated the situation to take over the ranch. I was obsessed with the success of your work, Mrs. Margaret. I wanted that knowledge, that excellence, but I didn't have the patience to build from scratch." Richard's confession brought a deep silence to the room. Margaret, however, showed no surprise or anger. Instead, she approached him with dignity. "You know, Richard, you could have learned all of this. I always shared my knowledge with those who showed true love for horses. But you chose the easy path, and look where it led you." Joseph, who was observing the scene, added his own perspective. "You always said that horses are like mirrors. They reflect our true nature. Maybe that's why Lightning never truly connected with you, Mr. Johnson, even when he was under your control." The wisdom of the old handler's words resonated with everyone present. William, in particular, seemed moved by them. "All these years," he said, "I always felt there was something special about Thunder. I mean, Lightning. Something that went beyond his exceptional performance in shows. It was as if he carried a story greater than all of us." Emily, who had finished organizing all the documents, approached her grandmother with a confident smile. "Grandma, with all this evidence, we can not only legally reclaim Lightning, but also seek justice for everything that happened to Starlight Ranch." Margaret looked at her granddaughter with pride, then at Lightning, who remained a noble and serene presence by her side. The horse, as if understanding the importance of the moment, gently bowed his head toward his former owner. "You know, Emily," Margaret said, her voice filled with emotion, "when I lost the ranch, I thought I had lost everything. But now I see that the true legacy of Starlight Ranch was never just in the property or the documents. It was in the love, the respect, the principles that guided our work, and that no one could ever take away from us. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from, and let's continue." The days following the revelation at the rodeo arena were intense. The story of Margaret and Lightning had spread throughout Dallas and the surrounding area, touching the hearts of people who didn't even know the world of rodeos. Local media covered every development of the case, turning the saga of Starlight Ranch into a symbol of resilience and justice. Emily, immersed in her mission to restore her family's legacy, worked tirelessly. Her makeshift office in her grandmother's living room was filled with documents, photos, and testimonies. In the center of the room, Margaret sat in her favorite armchair with Lightning visible through the window, grazing peacefully in the backyard. "What we propose," began Emily, presenting a series of carefully prepared documents, "is the creation of the Starlight Ranch Institute for Equine Research and Preservation, a center dedicated not only to preserving the techniques developed by my grandmother, but also to the responsible evolution of horse breeding in the United States." The proposal was ambitious, but well-founded. Months of intense work had revealed a wealth of knowledge in Margaret's records that went far beyond horse breeding. It encompassed studies on animal behavior, natural training techniques, and a deep understanding of the relationship between humans and animals. "The most interesting part," commented one of the veterinarians present, "is how Mrs. Margaret's methods align perfectly with the latest research in animal welfare. She was decades ahead of her time." William, who was actively participating in the discussions, added his perspective. "In all my years as a breeder, I've never seen such a comprehensive and humane approach. What I've learned over the past few months has revolutionized my own way of working with animals." The mayor of Dallas, impressed by the project, made a surprising announcement. The city is willing to donate land for the construction of the institute. After all, this story isn't just the Viana families, it's part of Dallas's cultural heritage. Margaret, who had been listening attentively, had tears in her eyes. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a mix of emotion and wisdom. "When I lost the ranch, I thought it was all over. But now I see that it was just the beginning of something much greater." The meeting continued with technical discussions about the project's implementation. Architects presented sketches of the future facilities, which included research areas, student housing, and of course, model stables based on the principles developed by Margaret. "And Lightning?" someone asked. "What will his role be in all of this?" Emily smiled, exchanging a knowing glance with her grandmother. "Lightning will be our most important teacher. Through him, we can demonstrate in practice all the principles my grandmother developed. He is the living proof that this method works." Joseph, who was now a constant presence in the house, shared his observations. "It's amazing to see how other horses react to his presence. It's as if Lightning carries not only the genetics, but also the wisdom of the Starlight lineage." Michael, the veterinarian, then presented his latest studies. "We've managed to map unique characteristics in Lightning's DNA that explain much of his exceptional qualities. This knowledge will be crucial for future breeding programs." As the afternoon progressed, more details of the project were discussed and defined. The old pain of an injustice was transforming into something new and promising. The dream that Richard Johnson had tried to destroy was reborn even stronger, no longer limited to a single ranch, but expanding to benefit future generations. "Look," Margaret said to Emily as they watched Lightning through the window, "how life has its own paths. Sometimes we lose something precious only to regain it in an even more meaningful way." Outside, Lightning lifted his head, his white chest marking gleaming in the afternoon sun. The horse that had once been separated from his roots had now become the link between the past and the future, between tradition and innovation. A young veterinary student who was part of the meeting summed up everyone's feelings. This story teaches us that when we work with love and respect, we create something that goes beyond ourselves, something that not even time or injustice can erase. Spring arrived in Dallas, bringing with it the first fruits of the work started months ago. The land donated by the city, once an empty field near the rodeo arena, now showed clear signs of transformation. The foundations of the Starlight Institute were beginning to take shape, and with them a new chapter in the city's history was unfolding. Margaret, seated in her special chair at the construction site, watched the workers with a special gleam in her eyes. Beside her, Emily organized the paperwork for the first group of students who would participate in the training program. The young lawyer had discovered that her grandmother's case was not isolated. Other families had also fallen victim to similar schemes over the years. "It's incredible how one story can reveal so many others," she commented to William, who had become a crucial ally. The breeder now dedicated part of his time to helping reorganize the records of the old ranch. "Every document we find," he replied, "tells not just about horses and property, but about people, dreams, traditions." On the porch of the house, Margaret spent long hours with Lightning, who had been temporarily moved to a small pasture at the back of the property. The daily reunion between the two was a scene that moved everyone who witnessed it. The horse, even after so many years, seemed to recognize every gesture, every word from his former owner. "Look," Margaret said to her granddaughter, stroking the animal's neck. "He still responds to the old commands, just as I trained him when he was just a colt." One afternoon, as Margaret shared stories about her breeding methods, an unexpected group arrived at the Viana house. They were representatives from the United States Horse Breeders Association, accompanied by professors from the local veterinary college. "Mrs. Margaret," began the president of the association, "we came because your story made us realize something important. Your breeding methods, your knowledge about bloodlines and equine behavior are a treasure that must not be lost." The proposal they brought was surprising. They wanted to document all of Margaret's techniques and knowledge, turning them into a training program for new breeders. Additionally, they offered full support for the legal recovery not only of Lightning but also of all the records and rights of Starlight Ranch. "You revolutionized horse breeding in your time," explained one of the professors. "His gentle handling techniques, his understanding of animal behavior, it was all decades ahead of its time." William, who was attending the meeting, added his own perspective. "Now I understand why Lightning was always so special. It wasn't just his exceptional lineage, but all the love and wisdom invested in his upbringing from day one." Emily watched her grandmother with pride. The woman who had silently carried the pain of her loss for so long now saw her work recognized and valued in a way she had never imagined possible. "You know what moves me the most?" said Margaret, her voice soft but firm. "Seeing that all the knowledge we built at Starlight Ranch can continue to help other breeders, other animals." The news of the project quickly spread through the equestrian community. Breeders from various parts of the country began expressing interest in learning from Margaret's experience. Her unique breeding method, which combined respect for the animals, natural behavior with a deep understanding of genetics, attracted attention from experts and enthusiasts alike. Meanwhile, Lightning continued to amaze everyone with his intelligence and sensitivity. The horse seemed to have taken on a new role, no longer just a show animal, but a living ambassador of Starlight Ranch's legacy. "It's as if he knows his responsibility," commented Joseph, who now visited regularly to help care for the animal. "Every time someone comes to learn about the story, Lightning presents himself with a special dignity." Michael, the veterinarian, had begun scientifically documenting the horse's unique characteristics. "The genetic markers we found in Lightning are exceptional," he explained during one of his visits. "Mrs. Margaret managed to develop a lineage that combines strength, intelligence, and gentleness in a way I've never seen in all my years of practice." The Viana household, once a quiet place where Margaret silently guarded her memories, was gradually transforming into an informal center for the study and preservation of the art of horse breeding. Emily realized she was witnessing not just the recovery of a family history, but the birth of something new and even more significant. Autumn arrived in Dallas, bringing winds of change. The milder weather seemed to conspire in favor of the new projects emerging around the legacy of Starlight Ranch. At the Viana home, an important meeting was about to begin. Emily had organized a gathering that brought together representatives from the city council, members of the Breeders' Association, and some of the most respected veterinarians in the region. It's amazing to think that in just a few months, we'll have young people from all over the country coming here to learn, Emily commented, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the applications. We already have over 200 candidates for the first 30 spots. A familiar neigh caught everyone's attention. Lightning, who now had a special space on the Institute's grounds, grazed peacefully in his new paddock. The area had been built following the exact specifications Margaret had used at the old Starlight Ranch. "He seems happier every day," observed Joseph, who had been officially appointed as the supervisor of the Institute's stables. "It's as if he knows he's helping to build something important." William, arriving for another board meeting, brought exciting news. "The breeders in the region are mobilizing," he announced, still mounted on his horse. "They want to establish a genetic bank to preserve the lineages developed at Starlight Ranch." The news was met with enthusiasm by Michael, who coordinated the research area of the Institute. "This goes far beyond preservation," explained the veterinarian, his eyes shining with excitement. "With this genetic bank, we will be able to study and better understand the unique characteristics that Mrs. Margaret managed to develop in her animals." The day was especially busy because a team of documentary filmmakers had arrived to record the history of the Institute. Among the interviews and recordings, Margaret shared not only her breeding techniques, but also the philosophy behind her work. "The secret was never just in genetics," she explained to the cameras, her voice soft but firm. "It was in respecting each animal's time, understanding their individual personalities, and building a genuine relationship between man and horse." Emily, watching her grandmother with pride, noticed how she had transformed in recent months. The old pain was still there, but now it served as the foundation for something new and hopeful. The injustice she had suffered had become fuel for positive change. "Look at this, Grandma," Emily called, showing some newly arrived photographs. They were satellite images of the old Starlight Ranch, now abandoned after Richard Johnson's public disgrace. The city is considering expropriating the area to turn it into an environmental preservation center. Margaret examined the photos, carefully recognizing every curve of the terrain, every area where her beloved horses used to graze. "Maybe it's better this way," she said after a moment of reflection. "The past should serve as a lesson, not a prison." In the late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky of Dallas with orange hues, a small ceremony was held to inaugurate the Institute's first completed stable. It was a modern structure, but one that incorporated all the principles developed by Margaret throughout her life. "This stable," announced the mayor during the ceremony, "will be dedicated exclusively to training and research. Here, students will learn not only about horse breeding, but also about respect, dedication, and perseverance." Lightning, as if understanding the importance of the moment, approached the area where the group was gathered. His majestic presence, the white mark on his chest gleaming in the setting sun, drew sighs of admiration. "He's more than a horse," said one of the young, aspiring veterinarians attending the ceremony. "He's a symbol that with love and dedication, we can overcome any obstacle." Margaret, hearing the comment, smiled softly. Her hands, marked by time but still steady, gently stroked Lightning's neck. The horse lowered his head, resting it gently on his former owner's shoulder, creating an image that perfectly encapsulated everything the Starlight Ranch Institute stood for: the union of traditional wisdom and hope for the future. The big day had finally arrived. The Starlight Ranch Institute officially opened its doors to welcome its first class of students. The atmosphere was festive, with colorful banners decorating the new stables and the main building, where theoretical classes would be held. Emily, impeccable in her navy blue suit, greeted the guests at the Institute's entrance. Her heart swelled with pride as she saw so many young people eager to learn the methods her grandmother had developed over decades of dedication. "It's amazing how everything has transformed," commented William, who had arrived to participate in the inauguration ceremony. A year ago, we were at the rodeo arena, uncovering the true story of Lightning. Now look at all this. The Institute had become much more than just a riding school. It was a center for research, preservation, and development of humane horse raising techniques. The stables, built following the principles established by Margaret, were considered a model of animal welfare. Every detail here has a purpose, explained Michael to a group of journalists covering the event. From the position of the windows to the type of material used on the floors, everything was designed to provide maximum comfort and naturalness for the animals. Margaret, who observed everything from her place of honor near the main stage, had tears in her eyes. Dressed in an elegant dark green ensemble, she was the embodiment of the dignity and wisdom the Institute represented. "Are you okay, Grandma?" asked Emily, approaching with concern. "I'm wonderful, my dear," replied Margaret, smiling. "Just thinking about how life takes turns. When I lost the ranch, I thought my work had come to an end. Now I see it was just the beginning of something much greater." The inauguration ceremony began with a special presentation. Lightning, led by Joseph, entered the main arena, showcasing all his majesty. The horse, once separated from his origins, was now the living symbol of the rebirth of the Starlight Ranch legacy. "This horse," announced the commentator, "carries in his blood not only the extraordinary genetics developed by Mrs. Margaret Viana, but also the living proof that true bonds overcome any adversity." Among the special guests was a surprise Emily had carefully prepared. Former employees of Starlight Ranch, some already quite elderly, had been located and brought to the event. Their testimonies about Margaret's methods and the unique atmosphere of the old ranch moved everyone. "Mrs. Margaret didn't just raise horses," said one of the former caretakers, his voice choked with emotion. "She built relationships of respect and love that lasted forever. Just look at Lightning. Even after so many years, he still recognizes that love." During the ceremony, it was announced that the Institute had established partnerships with universities in the United States and abroad. The Starlight Ranch method of breeding and training would be the subject of scientific studies, perpetuating and academically validating the work developed by Margaret. "This is just the beginning," Emily declared in her speech. "The Starlight Ranch Institute is born out of love for horses and respect for traditions, but its gaze is fixed on the future. Here, the wisdom of the past will join modern science to create something truly extraordinary." At the end of the ceremony, Margaret was invited to unveil the Institute's inaugural plaque. Beside her, Lightning remained serene, as if understanding the importance of the moment. The plaque bore an inscription that perfectly summarized the essence of the project: Starlight Ranch Institute, where love for horses transforms lives. "Look, Lightning," Margaret whispered, stroking the animal's neck. "We did it. Your father, Storm, would be proud. His legacy, and that of all our horses, will live on forever here." The sun was beginning to set on the horizon of Dallas, painting the sky with golden hues that seemed to bless this new beginning. The first students, who would start their classes the following week, looked in awe at the facilities that would be their home for the next few months. "It's like a dream come true," said one of them, "to be able to learn from someone who truly understands the soul of horses." 6 months had passed since the inauguration of the Starlight Ranch Institute, and the transformation was visible not only in the physical space, but especially in the people involved in the project. The first class of students was about to graduate, and the results exceeded all expectations. On a particularly special morning, Margaret watched from the balcony of the main building a scene that warmed her heart. In the central arena, a young student named Sophia was working with a horse considered problematic by its previous owners. Using the techniques developed by Margaret, the girl had managed to establish a remarkable connection with the animal. "See how she respects his time," Margaret commented to Emily, who had joined her grandmother to observe the practice. "This is exactly how it should be. Each horse has its own rhythm, its own way of learning to trust." Lightning, who now divided his time between practical lessons and moments of rest, grazed peacefully in his special paddock. The horse had become more than a symbol of the Institute. He was a patient teacher, demonstrating through his behavior the principles that Margaret had always advocated: You know, Grandma, said Emily, adjusting the teacup she held, I received some interesting news about Richard Johnson. She paused, observing her grandmother's reaction before continuing. He's working on a project to rehabilitate horses rescued from abuse. It seems our story affected him more deeply than we imagined. Margaret smiled softly. Regret, when sincere, can be a great teacher. Perhaps he has finally understood that true value lies not in what we possess, but in what we can offer to the world. The Institute had become a reference center that went far beyond horse breeding. Researchers from different fields, veterinary medicine, psychology, behavioral biology, came to study the methods developed by Margaret. The impact of her work reached dimensions she had never imagined. Look who's here, exclaimed Joseph, approaching the porch. A group of children from a local school arrived for another session of the equine therapy program the Institute had established. It was one of the most successful initiatives, providing horse-assisted therapy for children with special needs. It's amazing how horses can transform lives, observed Michael, who coordinated the program alongside a team of specialized therapists. Every smile from these children, every small progress is confirmation that we're on the right path. William, who had become one of the Institute's main supporters, arrived with more exciting news. Breeders from different regions of the country were adopting the Starlight Ranch methods, and the results were astonishing. People are realizing that respect and kindness aren't just moral values, he explained. They're also the most efficient way to work with animals. In the afternoon, during one of the theoretical classes, Margaret was invited to share her experiences with the students. Her presence in the classroom always created a special atmosphere, blending traditional wisdom with modern scientific discoveries. The secret, she explained to the attentive young students, is in learning to listen. Not just with your ears, but with your heart. Every horse has a story to tell, a lesson to teach. Our task is to be open to learning. One of the students raised her hand, curious. Miss Margaret, how did you manage to identify the potential of each animal? The answer came with the characteristic simplicity that made her teachings so special. I never looked just for physical potential. I sought the soul of the animal, its unique personality. When you respect that individuality, the potential reveals itself naturally. At the end of that afternoon, as the sun set on the horizon of Dallas, a touching scene unfolded in the main arena. Sophia, the young student who had worked with the problematic horse, managed to ride him for the first time. There was no resistance, no fear, just mutual trust, patiently built over weeks of dedicated work. See? Whispered Margaret to Emily as they watched the scene. This is how a true legacy is built, not with impositions or shortcuts, but with love, patience, and respect. Lightning, as if wanting to be part of the moment, approached the arena fence, attentively observing the interaction between Sophia and her new equine friend. His example continued to inspire new generations, proving that the true value of an animal lies not just in its physical abilities, but in its capacity to touch hearts and transform lives. The morning of the first graduating class of the Starlight Ranch Institute dawned with a special glow. The sky over Dallas displayed a deep blue, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of the flowers that decorated the entire campus. It was a day of celebration, but also of deep reflection on the journey that had turned a story of loss into a legacy of love and hope. The 30 pioneering students, dressed in their institute uniforms, gathered in the main arena for the final preparations of the ceremony. Each of them carried not only the technical knowledge they had acquired, but also a new way of seeing and relating to horses. It's hard to believe we've come this far, Sophia commented to her classmates as they adjusted the sashes they would wear in the special presentation. When I started, I thought I would only learn about horses. I ended up learning about life. Margaret, seated in her place of honor, watched the preparations with tearful eyes. Emily, always attentive to her grandmother, held her hand affectionately. Are you okay, Grandma? Couldn't be better, my dear, Margaret replied, smiling. I'm just thinking about how surprising life can be. Sometimes we need to lose something precious to gain something even more valuable. The ceremony began with a special presentation. All the graduates, mounted on their horses, performed a choreography that perfectly demonstrated the harmony between rider and animal. The smooth and precise movements were the result not of rigid commands but of a partnership built on respect and trust. Lightning, as expected, participated in the event in a unique way. Under Joseph's care, he demonstrated some of the special techniques developed by Margaret to the guests. His majestic presence and impeccable behavior were living testaments to the Starlight Ranch method. "See how he works," explained Michael to a group of international visitors. "Every movement, every response shows a deep understanding of what we are asking. This is the result of generations of conscious breeding and respectful training." During the ceremony, exciting surprises were revealed. The Institute had received international recognition with invitations for partnerships with equine research centers in Europe and the United States. The method developed by Margaret was about to cross borders, taking her philosophy of respect and love for horses to other parts of the world. "This is just the beginning," announced Emily in her speech. "Each of you graduates carries not just a certificate, but a responsibility. You are the guardians of this knowledge, the continuers of this legacy." William, who had become one of the most beloved teachers at the Institute, shared his own journey of transformation. "When I met Lightning, I thought I knew everything about horses. Today, I realize I was just beginning to learn. Every day here is a new discovery." A particularly touching moment happened when Sophia presented the results of her work with the horse everyone considered problematic. The animal, once nervous and distrustful, now displayed a confidence and serenity that moved everyone. "This horse," explained Sophia, "taught me that there are no difficult animals. There are only stories that need to be understood, hearts that need to be won back." Margaret, called to the center of the arena to hand out the certificates, had a special word for each graduate. These were not just formal congratulations, but true blessings from someone who had dedicated her life to understanding and respecting equine nature. "You are not just caretakers or trainers," she told the graduates. "You are guardians of precious knowledge, of a way of seeing the world that goes far beyond the stables. Every horse you touch will be an opportunity to spread more love and understanding in the world." At the end of the ceremony, as the guests dispersed for the celebration, a magical moment occurred. Lightning, on his own initiative, approached the group of graduates. One by one, the young professionals were able to stroke his neck, feeling the special energy emanating from that extraordinary animal. "It's as if he were blessing the new generation," Joseph commented, moved. Margaret watched the scene with a serene smile. Her life's work had not only survived adversity, it had transformed into something greater, more encompassing and more meaningful than she had ever imagined. It was a special afternoon at the Starlight Ranch Institute, the sun in Dallas already, making its way toward the horizon, bathed the stables in a golden light that seemed to bless every corner of the place. Margaret, seated on her favorite bench near the main arena, observed a scene she had never imagined witnessing. Before her, a group of children was participating in their first horse handling lesson. Among them was her great-granddaughter Lily, daughter of Emily, who at 6 years old already showed the same love for animals that had always characterized the Viana family. Lightning, now a respectable elder at 20 years old, remained the attentive guardian of the new generations. "Grandma," Emily called, approaching with a folder of documents, "I just received confirmation. The Starlight Ranch method has been officially recognized as an intangible cultural heritage of the United States. Your work will be preserved and studied forever." Margaret smiled, her wrinkled hands gently caressing the cover of the book resting on her lap. The first edition of The Starlight Ranch Method, A Journey of Love and Respect. A work that compiled all her experience and philosophy of working with horses. "Who would have thought," she murmured, watching Lily try to reach the muzzle of a young colt, "that the girl who dreamed of horses on my father's ranch would come so far?" The Institute had become much more than a school or research center. It was a meeting point between past and future, where traditional wisdom harmonized perfectly with the latest scientific discoveries. Researchers from various countries regularly visited the site, studying not only breeding techniques, but also the therapeutic impacts of the method in treating different conditions. William, who approached on horseback, brought exciting news. Mrs. Margaret, the socialization technique you developed is revolutionizing the treatment of traumatized horses across the country. Even Richard Johnson came to seek guidance for his rehabilitation project. The mention of Richard's name no longer caused discomfort. Time had turned old grievances into lessons, and Richard himself had become an example of how sincere remorse can lead to transformation. Michael, who coordinated the research area, joined the group with the latest results from genetic studies. It's fascinating, Mrs. Margaret. The behavioral traits you intuitively selected in your breeding are directly linked to specific genetic markers. You were decades ahead of your time. The sound of children's laughter blended with the gentle whinnies of horses, creating a symphony that filled Margaret's heart with joy. Sophia, now one of the lead instructors at the Institute, conducted the lesson with the same patience and dedication she had learned from her mentor. Every horse has its own story, Sophia explained to the children, repeating the words she had heard so often from Margaret. Our mission is to learn to listen to these stories with our hearts. Lightning, as if understanding the importance of the moment, gently approached the group of children. Lily, showing the same natural connection with horses that had characterized her great-grandmother, reached out her small hand to stroke the white mark on his chest. The same symbol that years ago had been the first link in the restoration of a story of love and perseverance. "You know, Emily," said Margaret, watching the interaction between her great-granddaughter and Lightning, "when we lost the ranch, I thought it was the end of everything. But God writes straight with crooked lines. What seemed like an end was just the beginning of something much greater." The sun began to set, painting the sky of Dallas with shades of pink and orange. On the horizon, where there had once been only empty fields, the Starlight Ranch Institute stood as a living monument to the power of love, perseverance, and faith in the future. "The true legacy," Margaret continued, her soft voice carrying the wisdom of a life dedicated to horses, "isn't in the awards, the recognition, or even the methods we developed. It's in the love we planted in the hearts of everyone who passes through here. This love, like ripples in a pond, will continue to spread long after we're gone." Lily, finishing her first lesson, ran to hug her great-grandmother. Her eyes sparkled with the same enthusiasm Margaret had shown in her youth. "Great-grandma, Lightning told me he wants to be my friend," the girl exclaimed, beaming. Margaret hugged her great-granddaughter, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. The circle was complete. The love for horses, which had begun in her heart so many years ago, now found fertile ground in a new generation. "Yes, my love," she replied, looking at Lightning, who watched the scene with his usual nobility. "Horses always know where to find a true heart." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching from and we'll continue.